So the Longbow is one of my favorite mechs, and I find this mech to be both seductive and very challenging to play because essentially you are a mech warrior that is strapped on to hundreds of missiles. And if you're not careful, you are going to find yourself in a lot of trouble. So we have a higher end ton mech, 2 long range 20 packs. I like that right away. It's got the redundancy. It has a good spread that if you roll average on the cluster table, you're looking at 10 to 15 points of damage. If you roll epic, it is an epic sight. If both hit and both roll epic, that is a lot of cluster hits dealing out significant damage to your opponent. We also have as a backup or in tandem 2 5-packs to fire out. And then, in theory, if things get really bad, we have 2 medium lasers. I find if we're utilizing the medium lasers, things are in a lot of trouble. It's kind of a weird combination, and I understand on paper what it's trying to do, but there's a few things that are missing to make it possible, and we're going to look at that, utilizing the lasers, not utilizing the lasers. So what role does this mech play? In Battletech, very, very specialized machines kind of go one of 2 ways. I find that either you build a lance around them, in this case, my longbow lance, taking multiple longbows, or multiple LRM platforms, archers, LRM carriers, parking them somewhere, and with indirect fire raining down literally hundreds of long-range missiles per turn on there. And that list is up, that podcast is up in the archive here, examining the nuts and bolts of how I pull that lance together. And underneath this vlog is a link to my blog where I've got more images and kind of battle reports and stuff in action looking at it. So we can go one way, that way. We can also look at the longbow as a piece to add to your collection, a single mech, part of a lance, working as fire support. Now, a close second is the archer, and following this podcast, we're going to look at the archer. Seems similar, but some very, very significant differences in it. The archer has a different feel and a different type of mech aggression to it. So as fire support, I find the longbow works really, really well with extremely close-in mechs. And if we look at the flow, if we look at the pace at Battletech, you and I are far away, whatever mechs we have. First couple of turns, we're approaching. We're trying to figure out where we're going to meet. We're looking at terrain, where we can utilize terrain. At some point, we're going to make contact, and we're going to begin firing off long-range shots. LRMs, autocannons, things like that. Depending on the mechs you have, it's either going to be there just to soften things up and throw some firepower down the table, maybe autocannon 5s, autocannon 2s. Sure, I'd like to hit, but it's just to soften things up. Or we're going to look to throw down some serious firepower at long range with LRM packs. Eventually, though, we're going to move to medium and then close range, where now we're mixed up in each other and the mechs are going head to head. And that's not to say you can't shoot at mechs, but the fire support is going to switch to the direct action in that moment. I call this, the close range, the danger close, that type of stuff, where you're 3 or 4 or 5 mechs, a couple of hexes away each. And at this point in Battletech, it's very hard to cut and run. When you are 3 to 5 hexes away, you all the weapons that you have to bear and all the weapons that your opponents have to bear are on those machines. If I turn and run, you're going to overpower me. I'm going to give you my back. I can't do that on there. So a lot of ways that we build in to take advantage of that are close-in brawlers, stuff like the Grasshopper, stuff that has maybe like the Warhammer, right? You've got maybe a long-range missile shot with the PPCs or the LRM-5 on the Grasshopper, but for the most part, it's short-range missiles, medium lasers, large lasers, where you're just going to close and go in. The longbow in this capacity, if it's paired up with a short-range lance, that means on the way in, you have something significant to do. A lot of mechs that are short-range focus firepower, they don't really have a significant long-range component, with the exception of maybe the Grasshopper on there. Grasshopper works really well with a longbow. So it's nice to take a longbow and have not only something to do at long range, but something significant, something that your opponent can't ignore. You have redundancy, 2 LRM 20 packs, redundancy, 2 LRM 5 packs. That's a lot of missiles coming down. Then once they close, well, the advantage here is that once you close with your other mechs, your opponent's going to be busy there. It's going to be very hard for them to break off and engage your longbow. It's not to say they won't. They might, but to make it very, very challenging. That is the optimum setup for the longbow. Now, as a longbow pilot, you're sitting on all those missiles. You've got absolutely no armor. It's very misleading because you're like a high-ton mech. It's, you should have a lot of armor. The armor is not, it's all the points are spent on the engine and on the ammunition and on the long-range missile launchers. There's a lot of bulk in there. So if you find it to where a close-range mech or another mech, the worst case would be like a Battlemaster pulling off and engaging you, you're in a lot of trouble. You're in a lot of trouble because you have what? 2 medium lasers? That's really going to do anything? I'd rather drop those medium lasers and take some more armor. Although I guess if a vehicle comes close, you've got something on there. And also with that is the fact that you don't have any arms. So you can't even go to physical attacks to say, look, I have all this weight because on the chassis we're mounting all these LRM packs. I've got some good bulk behind me. I'll be able to punch. So what does that leave? Kicking? And I'm not the biggest fan of kicking because there's a good chance, or there is a chance, I won't say a good chance, there's a chance you'll fall. Then you got to get up and you're going to take damage and you're going to get stomped on. So that's for... depends on the skill of your mech warrior pilot if we're going to do that. But I assume we're just playing with base 4-4 pilots. So the longbow, hang back, shoot, shoot, shoot. I find that as I approach, I want to have a place that I can withdraw to or start backpedaling or start moving away from to at least try and prevent my opponent, if they siphon something off to go after me, to prevent them from getting to that place where I am under the minimum range. So now not only am I adding my movement, my opponent's movement, but I'm adding, +2, 3, 4, 5, depending on under the minimum for the long-range missile packs. That's the worst place to be on there. Not to mention the fact that once it goes to internals, you are in a lot of trouble. So the longbow, I find, works in a very, very specialized lance, close-in lance, or taking multiple longbows. If you have a mix of mechs, something like... off the top of my head, maybe we have a Battlemaster for close-in work, longbow for the long-range work. Give me a Griffin or Shadowhawk. Shadowhawk would be a better choice, and then say a Locust. Not a bad mix of toys. A lot of possibilities in there, but the longbow being so specialized, it's going to be all over the place on that, and it will be easy for your opponent to move and close in on the longbow, isolate it, and put you in a lot of trouble. So if you take that longbow, you need to make sure your opponent can't isolate it and how you're going to do it. That said, even a single longbow, all those missiles, when they connect, it is like a knockout punch on there. And this is one of my favorite mechs, both to play solo and also as a dedicated lance. The only real question for the collector, do you go with the Rescene? It's got an interesting kind of shape to it. Or do you go with the primitive longbow with the re-release? And while I like both mechs, I like both models of it, the primitive just has a bulk to it. The primitive has an interesting layout of machinery for it. I think it's a better looking early tech model, and I really enjoy that one. That said, I have 2 of the early and 2 of the later models on there. So both of them are fantastic looking.